afternoon. My name is Mark Shafer. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Shafer. I'm speaking from the Carnegie Historical Museum in downtown Fairfield, Iowa. It's March 11th, 2001, and we're going to take a trip down memory lane with Parsons College graduates. One of our last programs featured the Millard Roberts era. Pretty colorful time for Parsons, but it had a history before Millard Roberts as well. And so today we want to concentrate on the academic excellence of a fine old institution. And Frankie Beatty right now is going to introduce our panelists. She helped organize a lot of this and rounded up this cast of characters. So Frankie, if you take it away.
In 1973, Joyce Gabbert won the Newspaper Writers Award for her article. It began, "She was a grand old lady. We thought she'd live to be 100, but she died at 98. And that was the way she began Parsons College obituary. But for us who knew Parsons before the Roberts era have many wonderful memories of it. Now, most of the people came from the surrounding area. And when Norval Evans and Russ Harper came from Metropolis, Illinois, well, that was just quite an invasion. And an old friend of mine, whose love and pride in Parsons was so contagious, came from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I never did remember why he came or how they found him. But anyway, it was a close-knit community, a close-knit college, and we have several alumni here, and I'd like to introduce some who are going to speak. Catch him with his blowing his nose, Stu Dahmer, and Edith Jordan, Dwayne Dooley, Mary McPherson, Betty Schwengels, Fred Flintsball. A little later we will hear from Mary Hughes, and also in the audience we have Vera Young and Jean Sells, Dorothy Bell, and any of you who can add to our comments, feel free to.
Okay, thank you, Frankie. We have lots of things to talk about, but I guess my first motivation, is to go in a chronological order. Mr. Gomer here has some artifacts from his parents' time at Parsons in the 1890s. And Fred Flintsbaugh's parents were there in the teens, in the early part of the 1900s. And then Miss McPherson was from the late 20s. We have people from the 30s, 40s, 50s. So basically we have a century's worth of decades represented in one way or another. So Mr. Gomer, would you like to share with us about some of the artifacts from your parents' era?
Yes. In the first place, I did attend Parsons 2 years at 34 to 36, but my principal Parsons heritage is my parents, who attended Parsons and graduated in 1897. And this is my mother's elder sorority certificate, and my Parsons 1897 football team picture. And I've got a Parsons College catalog, 1897 and 98 of my parents.
The tuition for a violin lesson was $10 in 1897.
Yes. And here's a little icon in the back of the general information about the Jefferson County Library. It's kind of interesting, which is where we are, and as it refers to its special pride of Fairfield's public spirited citizens and their library donations. And then degrees and prizes in 1897 include my mother, Minnie Marie Coy, and my father, James Stewart Gomer. And then also in the orchestra, my mother played a mandolin. I didn't know that. And then in the class of 1897, lists both my mother, Minnie Marie Coy, my father, James S. Gomer. Because he later went to medical school and graduated middle school at Rush College in Chicago. And they both graduated from Parsons. The mother taught at Logan Grade School for a period of time. And then I attended Parsons for 2 years, from 34 to 36, into Iowa. Then I went on to Wharton, University of Pennsylvania, and got my MBA back there. So I have deep feeling for Parsons. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gomer. Fred, what can you tell us about your parents' experience at Parsons?
Well, my mother and dad both graduated from Parsons in 1919. In those days, they didn't pay too much attention to years as they did later on. And my mother was fairly precocious, I guess, and went through in 3 years. She started in 1916. My dad took 4 years plus because he had 18 months out for the Army in World War I. And my dad was also most famous, I suppose, for his prowess as a athlete. He was played both football and basketball, and he attended what was the Parsons College Academy for 4 years before he went to college, and they let them play college football and at that time. And what the academy was the Parsons faculty actually sponsoring a high school. So he got his high school and his college all at Parsons and played football during that time until 1917 when he did go to the Army. Or to, I should say, the air branch of the Signal Corps was what he was a member of. He come back then and took a whole lot of subjects the last semester and summer school of 1919, so he could still graduate with his class. That's basically what I know about them for the 19-teens area, I guess.
Fred, I learned some way, maybe from your dad, or I don't know how, but he also won the shot put, discus, and javelin in the conference.
Yes, he was good in track too.
Well, that takes care of the teens. Now, Miss McPherson, Mary McPherson is a surprise guest. I don't think you knew you were going to be on TV.
No, I didn't.
But you went to Parsons in what years?
1925 to 29.
All right, 25 to 29. And any particular memories you have of your college years?
Well, should I stand up?
Oh, you can stay seated.
Yes, I do. I enjoyed. It was the first time I had ever been away from home. I grew up on a farm north of Des Moines, and I came to Parsons because it was a Presbyterian school, and we belonged to the Presbyterian Church in Des Moines. And my folks thought that if I had to be that far away from home, it would be good to be in a church-related college. And I think probably I went to, did those all 4 years in what it would take, the amount of money it would take to do 1 year at the present time, and maybe because the tuition, I can't remember what it was, but it was certainly nothing like it is today. I worked in the library the 4 years I was in college. I lived on the campus in Ballard Hall for the first 3 years, and working in the library those 4 years, and it didn't face east. But I can't remember of any very bad vibes coming from it or anything very bad happening because it faced west. And we lived at the dormitory, and the rules were, I suppose today people would just think it was terrible, but when you went out after 6 o'clock at night, you signed out, and when you came back, you signed in. And I remember once we went with a friend from Fairfield, decided on a Saturday afternoon we'd like to go to Ottumwa. And so we went to Ottumwa. And I don't know how the word got around, but when we got back, we were met by the dean of women at the door, and we got, I've forgotten how many demerits for having left the campus without permission. So we were checked up on very much. Then I can't remember our classes. We had classes also in the building that we called the Bible building all the time. We were there with the one that was torn down.
Parsons Hall.
Parsons Hall, and nothing very bad happened to us there either. And I worked cleaning in what was the conservatory at that time, the music building, which is now
Hen Mansion?
the Hen Mansion.
We call it Ewing Hall.
Ewing Hall, and it was. And I worked there cleaning to help pay for my tuition.
And it was called Ewing Hall, I think,
Ewing Hall.
after the third president of the college? I think that's his
I think
picture up
that
on the
was
wall
named
there.
after him.
Now, one thing we want to be sure and cover, Bar High Chapel is in the news right now.
Yes, we went to chapel
something like that.
4 days a week. On Wednesday, we went to either YMCA or YWCA meetings. And of course, if chapel attendance was taken, and if you weren't at chapel, you heard about it. And I think that was one reason my folks were glad to have me go there, because they knew I'd be checked up on.
She was wild, I guess.
Uh,
You were wild, I guess.
Well, as I recall, you ran a pretty tight ship in the library at the junior high some years ago. So you learned your lessons well. So chapel attendance was compulsory for 4 days a week?
4 days a week.
Wasn't it 5?
Well, 5, we went to YMCA or YWCA, but you didn't have to go to those. But chapel attendance was
Now, was it like a prayer service with hymns, or did you have
a
a sermon?
half-hour service, and a faculty member led the service. And we did singing. We had each day we had a certain, for Monday you had a certain program that you followed on Tuesday, and so on Thursday and Friday. And of course, one time some of the fellows got in and wired the seats and where the faculty sat. And so there was a little disturbance on that day. And another time somebody put a wagon up on top of the chapel. But those were not very exciting nowadays, but at that time they caused quite a commotion.
How'd you know it was fellows?
Oh, it got around.
Well, I think most pranksters today are too lazy to take a wagon apart and
I
go
think
to all that
so,
work.
probably.
They want something instant like a spray can. Now, you said there were different formats for each of the days. Did a particular faculty member take Monday chapel, Tuesday chapel, or did it rotate, or how did they do that?
Well, I don't remember particularly about that. I think that they rotated. I don't think that it was a set thing for each day at that time.
Now,
But you had an assigned seat,
oh, really?
yes.
Now, I understood that there was no dancing allowed on campus back then. Do you remember that?
Well, I remember that we girls danced in Ballard Hall, but I don't.
In terms of school dances?
School dances, no, I don't remember that there was. We sometimes would go out on picnics or go out.
Do you have,
I remember once going out south of town to a cookout, but they didn't have a lot of outside activities as I look back on it.
like when freshmen came in, did they have to wear the little beanies and all that?
Oh, yes.
All
Oh,
that
my, yes.
hazing?
Oh, yes.
That goes back. And then like homecoming, was that a
We
big
had,
event?
yes, and the first, we played the games. They played the games. They had, the football field was down where the gymnasium was built. And they had bleachers set up along the sidelines of that. And that's where they played their football games. And I can remember going to basketball games in that building, which was the old armory, which Danielson's
Sure.
took over.
Downtown.
Downtown.
Now, Mr. Gomer was talking about the public library being an asset to the campus in the 1890s. Was the public library used very much by students, or was the school library pretty much
Well, I can
intact?
remember going to the public library once or twice for something, but
But the school,
the school library, the
Parsons
Parsons
library
library was, yes, it was.
Do you recall
used.
how many volumes were in the library at that time?
No, I would have no idea.
Dwayne knows. You didn't work at the library, too.
I didn't work there, no.
Well, does anybody have questions about the 20s? These were the roaring 20s. They must not have roared very loud on campus. Was there a dress code?
No,
I suppose-
not that I can remember. I
Probably
remember
didn't
there
need
were
one.
fads that we followed. I remember one winter, everybody wore white stocking caps. I don't know why, but it just did. But no.
Well, thank you, Ms. McPherson. Well, that's the 1920s. Edith Jordan, are you the 30s? Great, this is Edith Jordan. Take it away.
Well, all right, I'll just stay seated then too.
Sure.
I just went to Parsons 2 years, my last 2 years, because I went to a junior college at home for my freshman and sophomore years,
Now, where was home?
Clarinda, Iowa.
And then, how did you find out about Parsons?
Oh my, Roy Lawson recruited me, and of course we were Presbyterians too, so of course I'd heard about it, but mainly Grace McClellan, and everybody called her Queenie. She was from Clarinda, and she was, I imagine, she was graduated in the earlier 20s, or maybe
I remember
was
her.
she about your
No,
age?
she was
already
too-
secretary
yes,
to the
yes, she was already
president.
working there.
But we knew her and her relatives, and so we'd heard about it. And Roy Lawson was an athletic director or teacher at Council Bluffs. And if any of you remember Louise Simpson Lawson, this was her husband. So he recruited me. So of course I was a little older than the incoming freshman. And I had to wear a beanie cap too. And of course I thought that was beneath me. But anyway, it was fun.
So transfer students had to wear the beanie.
Oh, yeah,
Oh, my.
sure.
I just
Oh,
figured,
yeah.
I figured you'd be off the hook.
Well, I don't know. I think I did. Anyway, I remember I joined Elsevier, and I remember what they called Hell Week. And of course, I was right there with all the freshmen and having to wear, I don't know what we had to wear. Didn't we have to wear something special? I can't remember. Anyway, of course, we had to do all sorts of things to the upper class Elseviers, you know, run errands for them and do all sorts of things. But in those days, we didn't have a house. Now, when you were in school, you did, didn't you?
Hey, Mrs. Hughes, we have a chair. We may as well get you up here now. Well, sure.
Well,
I'll scoot over a
I'll
little bit.
defer.
And you
on a
can
few
dialogue
things.
if you have to.
Let me-
So we just had a room in,
Okay.
what did they call it? Fairfield Hall.
Okay.
That was the room the place where you paid where Clarence Green held forth as president, and you paid all your bills there and so forth. And we had a room on the second floor. So that was the way we did it.
Now, Mr. Gomer's framed certificate from his mother said literary society.
Yes,
So was
it-
it wasn't just a sorority then?
Well, it was kind of. They had social
Oh, yeah.
functions,
Oh, yeah.
very definitely.
Well, that's
Okay.
definitely in those.
Yes, Scott's
in
aunt
our
was
area,
a,
it's sort of
a
social.
little years, couple years ahead of Mrs. Gomer, and they had it then too. So, and then the reason, the only way I could come to Parsons was during the Depression. You know, we had all these alphabetical grants. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a student work program. And I also worked at the library under Mr. Ford. And that was really, it paid most of my tuition. And it was a great, great boon for me. I doubt if I could have come without that. So, I was going to tell you then, coming as an upperclassman, I didn't stay at Ballard. And there was a house across from about, I would say the Bible building on, what would that be, 4th Street. And that was called the Junior Senior House.
So the big old white house, big frame house?
Well, the AK was at the farther end, the south end of the block. And this was further, well, it would have been, I suppose, where the men's residence, the dorm, now. Maybe it was probably torn down for part of that.
It was the Heaton House.
What?
It was the Heaton House
No, the
to begin
Heaton
with,
house
wasn't it?
was across the
It was
driveway.
It was across.
And I stayed there in my
across,
senior year, the Heaton house.
Across 4th Street.
But there was another house. There was a big driveway,
Oh.
and this was just south of it, a white one. And the Melanders, he was the choir director, and they had apartments on the first floor, or lived on the first floor, and they were our people that checked up on us. So.
Yeah, were hours relaxed for upperclassmen a little bit?
Not that much. We were a little privileged, but I think we had a sign-out book there. But my senior year, there weren't very many of us that didn't have housing, and so we were put over into the Heaton house. And someone forgot to put the sign-out book. And all year. And Mrs. Heaton was pretty good age, and her daughter, who was, I'd say about 10 years older than we were, was closed her eyes and ears to many things, but we didn't, none of us ever had
You never went to a tum already.
Oh, no. And of course, I stayed in town quite a few times with some of my sorority friends. But, and getting to Parsons or to Fairfield was, we had to go by train, and there was quite a group of us from southwestern Iowa. Some of the football players from Red Oak and Creston and Shenandoah, and so it's a wonder that we weren't booted off the train when it was time to go home. And some of my other memories, in connection with trains, I can't remember, Stu, whether it was the 34, 35 year the 35, 36, that the Zephyr came through for the first time, and that was quite a great experience. The big silver bullet or whatever it was, and I think we even said something about it in chapel, if I'm not mistaken. It came through about then. But I remember we all had to go to Ballard Hall for our meals, and Miss Kidder, was she there when you? She was a so-called dietitian. I guess she really was a dietitian. I shouldn't say so-called. But those of us who liked the food we had at home were, it was quite a change. We had, now I realize we were served white asparagus, and of course that's quite a treat. But it was everything was canned. But we didn't think it looked, we didn't like it very well. And Queen Anne cherries, we had quite a few of those. But all in all, we survived. But I really envied the kids that that were waiters and worked in the kitchen, because they really had a lot of fun. And we had to kind of behave ourselves at the table. Then I also remember chapel with a alphabetical seating and taking roll. And
Now, did they actually call your name off, or did they just?
no, there was one person, wasn't there one person assigned to
in
each
group.
seat?
That
Or was
took
it?
so many seats.
Oh, okay,
in a
well, I couldn't
group,
remember
and one
whether it
person
was.
took the attendance for that group.
We went, I thought we went 5 days a week.
I think so.
I thought it was 5 days, and then when was this when we were juniors or seniors, that we had the chapel strike? Oh, and that, the faculty thought that was very unseemly, that we should do that. But there was a little article in one of these, or in a portfolio, I can't remember which it was, but Willard
And the
Pedrick.
portfolio is the name of the campus newspaper.
Yes,
Correct.
yes. And I didn't bring any of those. I didn't have any, except someone gave us a so-called bound copy of 34, 35. And it's just kind of in shreds, but I've enjoyed reading that. And in that, I think there was an article about it, and according to that, Willard Pedrick claimed leadership for it, but actually somebody else had been talking about it. But and he admitted that he kind of brought it all together, and it was
Is
really
this Pedrick's funeral home?
Pedrick.
Oh.
No, it's not Pedrick's funeral.
Oh, no, Willard. He was in our class, and he was quite a debater, and then he went on to teach at Northwestern in law school. That's where he took his law degree. And then he founded the Tempe Law School in Arizona.
Oh, my.
So he was always, he kind of brought everything together, brought it to a head. And I think I was home for spring break when it came out in the Register about the chapel strike. And of course they made a big to-do about it. And Penn admitted that he revised the Communist Manifesto to apply to this. Here are the quotes that he gave to the student body to get them stirred up into action. Students of the world, you have nothing to lose but your change. That strategy really worked. And the attendance finally, even with the reluctance of Clarence Green and a lot of the faculty. So we were reduced to 4 days a week. And I can't remember whether we still had to take attendance or not, probably. But the Register stressed the ties to the Communist Manifesto. And of course it was a big story, and it died down soon.
Now, was chapel in the morning, the afternoon?
Morning,
Morning.
middle of the morning, wouldn't you
11,
say, about middle of the morning?
Middle of the morning,
Yeah.
10 o'clock.
Yeah. Oh, I was
That way
10 or
you-
10:30.
That way you didn't have time to go to a tunnel.
No, we couldn't go, I never went to a someone in the middle of the day. We didn't have any money anyway to go shopping. One thing I do remember, whenever games were football or basketball or something like that, we would have a pep rally. And I remember the first one that I ever heard, they usually got Jimmy Rules, who ran, what did he run? Shoe repair shop. And he was a Greek immigrant that had come over, and of course any patriotic day too. And he was a very great patriot of America, of the United States. And he would get up there and shout, you know, and just really carry on for the pep rallies. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Now let me see. Okay. Now I remember we had something happen on the top of the chapel too, and I thought maybe that was the first time that it had ever happened.
Oh, no, that was a favorite place.
Oh, evidently. Well, we had, what did we have? Oh, a privy on top of the on top of the chapel, and the portfolio made a great thing of it. You know, they called for an investigation, and they said it was really demeaning to the spirit of Parsons. You know, and degraded the chapel, and so forth. And Bob Long was the editor of the portfolio. Of course, then it came out, I don't know if everybody knew it, but it finally leaked out that Bob Long and Jim Taylor, that's Ben's brother, younger brother, were the ones that had done it.
Little smoke screen activity.
Oh, yes, yes.
And later, Catherine Cathcart, when she was going to Parsons, they put a cow in Ballard Hall.
Well, I thought that she was she was maybe a year behind me,
Well,
but she was in school when I was.
Okay.
And I thought in one of the articles in here featuring Millie Simmons, May, I think she mentioned that, but I didn't mention it because I wasn't sure where it was. Now, the one thing I do remember when I first got there, someone suggested we go down to the jail. And I thought, this is really interesting. Well, of course, the jail cafe, which was on the south in New Chicago. Was it there when you were there? Probably wasn't.
Jim David, that was a main hangout.
yeah.
They had the most wonderful pork tenderloins. And of course, you know, malted milks and all sorts of other things. And that Tom and Frances Dwyer ran that, and they were just like, you know, a lot of the kids that had problems would pour out to them, and they were very sympathetic. And then, of course, the Purity downtown was quite a gathering place. I smoked my first cigarette there. I thought I was really daring. I didn't like it, but I didn't dare let on.
That was on the west side of the square.
Yes.
Where Perry's Clothing was. And Is there anything there now? The dollar store?
The dollar store
I'm
just
not sure
closed.
exactly where
along there.
The dollar store just closed.
Is that,
Is that where it was?
Yeah, so the dollar store that just closed, that's where Purity was.
And in the back room, there was that dance room they call the Terpsichore.
Oh, yes,
And
you
we went back and had
could
folks
dance
The
there.
Terpsichore.
And didn't they have some kind of, it wasn't called a jukebox, but what did they have for music?
What was jukebox in my
Okay,
time?
all right, well, that's probably what it was. Then I'm just going to touch a little bit on the choir trips. We met for practice in Ewing Hall on the east side, and I mentioned Melander was the director. And the bus trips, when we would have choir trips or have once a year, we would go to various schools and churches and mostly in Iowa, but sometimes over into Illinois and down. When I was there, we went down once to a college, I can't remember the name of it, but in Kansas. I think it was where Professor Melander had gone to school. And of course the bus trips were just hilarious. We always had lots of fun on those. I remember Scott was sitting on the aisle once, and we rounded a curve and a violin case came down on his head. But, and then during the performances, sometimes it would be very hot and close, and we would be arranged on risers, you know, so that everybody could see the director. And usually somebody either fainted or fell off the back row or something happened. And then I must touch, since we've had such a tough winter, the winter of 35, 36. It was terrible. That's when I was living at the Heaton House. And of course, we took all of our meals at Ballard. And trying to get across the street, you see, the highway was plowed out, but the snow would be banked up on either side. So we'd precariously climb up to the top and fall down to the street and then climb up again and go. But it was very fun. But I had a wonderful education. I always regretted that I didn't have a Dr. Hinkhouse as a history professor, because I had Goldtree, Dr. Goldtree, Keith Goldtree. Was it American history? I think it was, and then of course some education history. But all in all, I had a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Edith. Okay, that's the 30s. The 40s. Is that Betty?
Oh, I overlapped with her. I
Oh.
started in 36.
Oh, you did? Well, let's finish.
Oh, I didn't, well, Paul was in my graduated, but did you come in as
4 years ahead of
a,
me.
I know, but you come in as a freshman when he graduated then, that fall? Oh, I didn't realize that.
I
Well,
started
let's
in
finish the
36.
30s out then. Betty Schwengels.
And we graduated in 40. Many years later, when I was trying to coerce young ladies into what they should study in college and various things I was supposed to do, I always said, after 4 hard years of work in college, I graduated with a degree and a husband in that order. And I think it's worthwhile to do it in that order. They probably got tired of hearing that. Well, most of the things that she's talked about were still going on when I was there. My brother was involved with the great scandal of the strike. Willard managed to put part of it off on my brother,
Yeah.
so they didn't get along very well for a long time after that. I lived at the Pedrick's house, which was down on C Street in the south part of town for my first 3 years, and walked out to the college right after breakfast for morning classes, walked back for lunch at noon, walked back in the afternoon for classes, walked back for dinner, walked back in the evening for choir and other things. And that, I don't know how far that was. It must have been at least a mile, maybe
Oh,
more
I
than
think
a mile
maybe
and a
more
half
than
or 2
that.
miles.
'Cause-
But that's the only way we had to get there, so that's what we did. And later I told my children, I can't take any credit because I walked everywhere. If I'd had a choice, I wouldn't have. I didn't have a choice. Maxine Cupp had the only car in campus at the time I was there, and she would take as many people as could get in the car.
Who did?
Maxine Cupp.
Oh.
But I didn't know anybody else that had a car, so we walked everywhere. It was probably good for us that we did.
Now, before it slips my mind, you have a green and white Parsons button, but you're wearing pink and white, or
Right.
pink and green.
These are the colors.
The wild rose.
Rose and green.
Rose.
Rose and green.
Rose and green. Where the wild rose tints the
Yeah.
prairie.
Where
That's
the
right.
summer sheet stands under the long water of the
Rose and green, right.
Okay, so old rose and green were the original
Were the
colors.
original colors.
Yeah.
Then when we came back here to teach, they changed the colors to the green and white. A lot of people were very upset about that, including me. Roberts didn't like that pink thing at all. He thought that was terrible, so they changed it to white and green, which I thought was not very
I
original.
thought we weren't going to talk about him.
Betty, tell us something about the fashions and how you dressed and how the first one up in the morning, the fellows was best dressed and that sort of thing.
Well, I had one roommate to start with, a junior-senior house, my senior year, what you were talking about before, the house on the north side of the highway. And that was Kay Voorhees. Her father was the minister at the Presbyterian Church here. She and I were roommates then that year. But then they had a big fire at Ballard, if you remember, and they had to move everybody out. So then they scattered them among all the rest of us. So then we had 3 people in a two-person place. We all wore the same size clothes, all 3 of us, and none of us had any money. So we each had 2 dresses, and we were expected to wear a dress when we went for dinner in the evening. So whoever got to the closet first had the choice of 6 dresses. Which led to some harsh words sometimes.
Betty, may I interrupt for a minute? Did you have to sleep out on a sleeping porch?
Some people did in the junior senior house after they moved in those extra people.
Well, if you had a lot of people, you couldn't.
Yeah,
of course.
and our third person did.
Oh,
She
was
slept out on the
cold.
porch because the rooms were really too small for 3 people.
yeah.
And it was a little, well, it was a little frustrating anyway because Kay and I were the same type of person. When we used something, we put it back because we didn't want to clean it up later. Helen Bowlesby was our third person who threw everything on the floor all week. Everything went in a pile. On Saturdays, she cleaned like the white tornado, and everything looked wonderful for one day on Sunday. So we had a few fisticuffs over that, too. Then when we were juniors, Fritz Farrow came up from Missouri to coach football at Parsons College. And he brought some big, brawny football players with him. My, that was exciting. 5 or 6 men came with him. And we didn't have a great many men yet on the campus. So at noon, we would go over to Ballard Hall and dance on the mezzanine, and everybody would fight over who got to dance with those guys. It was really exciting. One of them was Frosty Schwingles. What else?
Betty, tell them about Button Freshie. They talked about the freshman
Yeah.
ladies, but.
Of course, this is obviously not mine because it has the green and white. I don't know what happened to mine with the pink on it. But we had to wear one of these all day long. And whenever we met an upperclassman, we had to drop our books, put our finger on the button, and bow low. Some of them even made you get down on your hands and knees.
I don't
Not
think
everybody
I had
did
to do
that. But we had to show proper respect every time we saw anybody. That kind of slowed things down, too. And during Hell Week, I've told this story before, Christine Pedrick and I were Elsevier's together. Those Elsevier bookends, by the way, down there, I made when I was a pledge. I don't know how they got clear down there.
Oh, boy.
I also made my pledge paddle. It was mandated that I do that, or I wouldn't have. And it has the list of my actives on it and the list of my pledge class for that year. Anyway, we had a different assignment every day for Hell Week. And one day we had to dress up in costumes. I dressed as a baby in a long white dress and a bonnet and had a bottle full of milk. And she was dressed as a nursemaid and had to pull me in a wagon every place we went. Of course, we were late to class all day long. We got into trouble all day because she had to deliver me and then go to her class, so she was mad at me all day long. And the milk got sour. That was a terrible day. We had our hair done up in 13 pigtails with oil on them. Olive oil on everything. And by the end of the week, I tell you, just looking at an olive oil bottle, I got sick. It took weeks to get your hair back to any kind of shape after that.
Edith spoke that she smoked her first cigarette at the Purity. Of course, it was there in daylight. You did not smoke on campus.
Oh,
Maybe
mercy,
after dark,
no.
but
Oh,
not,
no.
not in daylight.
Well, the cloisters once in a while. You could, maybe in the cloisters on the street side.
In
I
daylight.
think some of the fellows did, but I didn't. I didn't pursue the cigarette bit.
You mentioned the food at Ballard. We always had those white cherries for lunch, and we always counted them. That was the first thing we did when we sat down. And you were supposed to get 7, I think, and if somebody got 8, that was a really big day. It was an exciting life. And on Sunday for dinner, we would have chocolate ice cream with whipped cream on top of it.
Oh.
I never had that combination before or since, but it was exciting because it was different. Frosty worked at Red and Ruth's downtown. Most of you know about that too. Ruth took good care of him, fattened him up while he was there. Let's see.
Red Roosters were bodies.
Yeah.
When I lived at junior senior house, the house mother was Dean Dora Dexter, who lived there too, and I mean, she cracked the whip. I got locked out twice that year. We went on a picnic and didn't get back in time, and it was like breaking into the mint to get back into the house. You know, you had your name put on a list, and it was posted for everybody to see that you were late getting in. Very embarrassing. President Green was the president of the college, the third one in the bottom row. I never did know what was the matter with him. He carried his head like this.
A wry neck.
always like this, and I never found out
Yes.
why. There was something wrong. His wife was voluptuous,
Not really, just big.
big.
When he first came to the campus, the story went around that they lived in the president's house, that she sat up in the upstairs window with field glasses to survey the campus to see what was going on the campus. Whether that was true or not, I don't know.
I was president of the YWCA chapter my senior year, and I had to hostess a lot of things at Broadview, the president's house. I always had to stand in the receiving line with her and him for whatever we did. And they had a grand piano. We stood in front of the grand piano usually. Somebody had brought her a beautiful Spanish shawl with great big red cabbage roses on it.
Just what she needed.
And it was draped over the piano ordinarily, but whenever we stood in a receiving line, it was draped over her. And the students said they couldn't tell the difference. I remember that very well.
Could be so cruel.
And the thing that went up on the roof of the chapel when we were there was the skeleton of a horse that came from the biology department.
I remember hearing about that, but I couldn't
Went up
find
on
it
the roof.
verified, so evidently.
They also took a Model T apart and put it up on the front porch of the Zeta House during our time. That's hard work. People did a lot of work to do that kind of thing. I can't think of anything else particularly.
Well, thank you, Betty. Now, who's next? The 40s?
I went to 47.
47. All right.
We're classmates.
All right, Dwayne Duke.
You're asking quite a bit from a man that has problems remembering where his glasses is. To go back 54 years, these ladies have done a fine job of remembering. I would like to start with the impact that veterans had on the campus in 47. It was quite a transformation. I attended a school that I graduated at 16 and started at Parsons at 17 after I had a birthday in July. And the GI Bill was enacted in 1954, and by 1946 and 7, then the veterans started coming to the campuses, and in fact there were about 2.2 million veterans that took advantage of the GI Bill. And I never will forget, there was no smoking on campus. One morning before we went to class in Fairfield Hall, they were all standing in front of the Fairfield Hall smoking. Dr. Tom Shear came to his office. He came to the line of people smoking, and he stopped and kind of had an awe-stricken look on his face. Didn't say anything, went into Fairfield Hall. The next day, there were cigarette butt cans along the walk. They were able to start smoking. Enrollment had doubled about that time, because approximately 200 had been in college, and by our sophomore year there was about 500 people there. And when I arrived, the only place there was to stay, they had some old barracks and some trailers over where Howard Dorm is today in the library. So they were finishing the barracks that I was going in. It didn't have any windows in it. And I lasted until first part of October and contacted pneumonia because it was cold, no windows, and no heat yet. And so I went home for a week, recovered, and Mr. and Mrs. Ford, who was the librarian, had a room in there upstairs. And so I stayed at the Ford residence that freshman year. And then this next year, I moved into the fraternity house of the AKX. And there were two fraternities, the AKX and the Zetas. And we had to, during time that we were pledges, we had a piano on our front porch at the AK house. So we had to go over and carry it to the Zeta house at night. And of course, then they found out who did it, so they made us come back and return it. So the piano went back and forth several times on the shoulders of many pledges. Barhite Chapel, the chapel had, veterans changed a lot of things. There was a nice mesh of 17, 18-year-olds and 25 and 26-year-olds. And they were not in favor of going to chapel every day. So they made Tuesday mandatory, and Thursday you could go if you wanted to make it up, or go twice a week. And so that kind of changed. I guess I was very grateful to Parsons. I was allowed, or we were allowed at that time, to take an education course that we had 2 years of education, and then we could go into the teaching fields. And that's what I did. And spent 3 years teaching, and then got drafted into the Korean conflict, and came back and met one day while I was home on leave, I met a young lady at an athletic event. And I have a lot of memories of Bar Height Chapel because spent over 100 days in Bar Height Chapel while I was in college. And this young lady and I decided to get married, and we were married in Bar Height Chapel. And so when they were talking about tearing Bar Height down, my wife became very upset and asked me if it would be possible to move it to our backyard. Didn't think so. Some of the professors that we had were very, very good. I remember Mrs. Hinkhouse had English. I had an English class with her, and we had to give speeches. And I remember the first time that we had to give a speech, I was devastated, very intimidated by these veterans as they would get up. They talked about Iwo Jima, talked about the Battle of the Bulge, talked about Pearl Harbor, and that made my days on the farm pretty hard to describe about something that was very important. But I survived it. Also, the athletic teams were not exceptional. That year they hired Dick Ives as the basketball coach. He had been an all-stater from Diagonal, Iowa. He'd gone to Iowa and became an All-American. And so they were elated as they hired Dick to come down and coach our basketball team. And I think he must have had more success playing because the record was 4-18 that year, and I think he left. So, and O.B. Nelson then took his place. So those were just some of the things that I vaguely remember. Mary Catherine?
I don't have all those notes, but I'll approach it from a woman's point of view. I lived on the campus. I lived in Ballard Hall my first year, and then my second year I lived in the Elsevier house, and this was right next door to the Sells family. And I think we drove them absolutely bananas for years. But I remember freshman orientation so well. One thing in particular, I counted, there were 35 faculty members, and they all lined up in Trustee gym. The ladies were in long gowns, and every freshman went through the line and shook hands with every faculty member. And that was right after we arrived. So I think it was a very close-knit organization. What else? There were 2 fraternities and 2 sororities, and we were killed with kindness right away. We were rushed right away. Many parties, we had to attend them all, and Frankie mentioned the dress code. Even though we were poor, we dressed very well. We only wore slacks and jeans on the weekend or after classes. And the year I came to school, I don't know if you remember, the new look hit. And that meant that dresses went to your ankles. So most of our wardrobe was obsolete. But we still dressed very well. And unlike Betty, I married before I graduated. I went 2 years and I was married, and then I finished my last 2 years. But it was a wonderful experience. I wouldn't have wanted to go anywhere else.
Mark, I might add also, they were talking about Hell Week. When we would come out of Tuesday chapel, the upperclassmen would be lined up, and all of the boys had their beanies on and run what they called the belt line. They would take their belts off, and you'd have to run through the belt line. And I think Mr. Glinken got his track boys from that little episode. And then also we had to wear burlap underwear for a week.
Say girls too.
Oh, the girls had to do silly things. Oh,
Without the
yes.
burlap.
No.
No, some did awful things.
Well, where do you get burlap underwear?
You made it
Yeah.
out of a burlap sack,
Homemade.
Oh my.
out of a gunny sack.
That's hysterical. Goodness gracious.
Did you save it?
Of course.
Well.
I've got it on now.
No, that makes my skin crawl.
Yeah, right now.
Ugh, yuck. Brad, take us into the 50s,
It's like
quick.
a pair of shirts.
I know.
Well, in addition to that, Fairfield High School Letter Club initiation in the 40s had to wear burlap everywhere. And things got so rough with the paddles, they finally stopped it in Fairfield High School in the 40s.
Okay. Couple footnotes on my mother and dad back to the teens. They did meet at Parsons College and married there. My mother was from the Sydney, Iowa area, not too far from Shenandoah. And also, she was an Empyrean.
We might be outnumbered.
You want to fill us in on that, Fred? An Empyrean, you said?
Empyrean.
Okay.
And the other sorority.
Oh, okay.
Algebra.
Okay.
In fact, I think she has a chair from some reason on Parsons College, which we now have, just a straight chair that was surplus at one time or another, I guess, and she bought. Well, my life on the campus began in the fall of 1950. I spent my first year at Iowa University, and due to the fact that I thought I wanted to be an engineering student and had a real struggle with math, I decided to come back to a maybe an easier school to see if that would help. Actually, it didn't. I still had a struggle with math and finally gave up and went with what was easy, which for me was history. The life on the campus at that time was somewhat slow compared to our life today. We had a student union that was the northwestmost house on the campus at that time. It was just southeast of a little filling station that was on the east side of Highway 1. The whole downstairs of that was a student union where you could get pop or coffee or whatever, and maybe a sweet roll or something else. So I would try to arrange classes so I could have some 8 to 10 in the morning and then stop over there an hour or two and glance at the newspapers, and then have the rest of the classes in the afternoon. And of course I lived at home and ate dinner at home, but I drove back and forth with the car. I was fortunate, I guess, that way. What was this house? Does anyone know what that was called? Or?
No, but that cafe or restaurant stayed on, didn't it, for a while?
Well, it was a student union, yeah,
No, but I mean, as a restaurant.
I guess. It would be about where that Learning in the Round building is now.
That would be Broadview, later became the President's House.
Oh.
But it was the student union for a while.
Where was it? Was this on campus?
Yeah.
Broadview, where later the presidents lived. Well, I bet maybe they lived there before,
Oh,
but it
yeah,
became
their
the student.
Broadview was there when I was in school. But that's not as far out as what Fred's talking about, I don't think.
What he said where the Learning Center was.
Yeah, it's
That'd be
it's
Broadview.
right
Okay,
on the
all right, I'm sorry.
then the northwest edge of the campus.
All right, I thought from your
That'd be
description. you were-
Broadview, wouldn't it, Jean?
I remember where it was.
Yeah.
That was
And they did, the
Broadview.
student union was there. They served meals at
Nice, I
noon.
didn't- I thought it was. What we call-
Anyway, I
Was he on South Main?
found at Parsons College that course that I thought I would have to take to get through was economics. And so this was taught by Howard Dorset. I forget whether he was a doctor now or not. Was he Dr. Dorset? And actually, I found I did real well in that, surprisingly. And so I did take another course or two, and he became my, I guess, tutor or whatever you want to call it for my thesis when I graduated from Parsons. And so he and I become very good friends. Then economics was an unusual one for me that I didn't know I would like, and also English Lit. Now, can anyone remember who taught English Lit at that time? It was a lady.
Winifred Watts.
Winnie won.
Okay. I did so well in that, she took me aside one day and said, you know, you ought to give up that thought of engineering and go into English Lit. Well, that was about the last thing I would want to go into at that time. But anyway, I did do better in that. And then long-suffering Mr. Jennings, does anyone remember his first name?
Janice.
Janice.
Dr. Janice.
Dr. Jennings, was that it? All right. He was a math teacher, and he put up with a lot with me, but I finally struggled through analytical geometry, well, college algebra, analytical geometry, and trigonometry, and gave up with calculus. Also gave up the engineering idea. So then I went into history, and some of the history profs were Ralph Sayre, and I believe there was a Kenneth Millsap a little later on. And I took a political science course under Kenneth Millsap, thinking that I, might get quite a bit of good out of it, because I didn't really know what way I wanted to be pointed at that time. Well, as it turned out, this was one of those easy classes for the jocks in school, because there was no test given for the whole class except for the semester test at the end, and it was an open book test. So about all you had to do was read the book assignments and be a little prepared at the end. And of course I aced both tests and got some complaint from the jocks for trying to raise the grade curve. This again was something that was easy for me. It was an interesting incident. You're telling about the movings of the pianos and cows and horses in buildings, and so on and so forth. We had a young prof, and at that time an awful lot of the profs were only about 4 or 5 years older than us students. And so this young prof, and I can't remember his name to save me now, but he had bought, and this was about in 1952, 53 year, I believe. He had bought a brand new Buick car. Never mind that it was a stripper, a plain Jane, and was a Buick Special, the very cheapest he could buy. It was a Buick, and it was brand new, and boy, he kept it shined up, and really was proud of that car. One day, when we let out classes for noon, he come outside, and his car was up on wooden cribbing with all 4 wheels at least 3 feet off the pavement. So things did happen at that time also.
Fred, weren't you in the band? We haven't talked about the Parsons College band.
I know we haven't. I was just kind of getting some of the kind of life in general out of the way. A class that I took that I knew I wasn't going to do too well in, but I had to get it out of the way, and that was some kind of foreign language. And I decided on French because of Millie Simmons as the teacher. And I'd like to paint you a word picture of Millie. She might come in a warm spring day into the driveway of the college, driving her bright yellow 48 Mercury convertible with the top down and her white scarf flowing in the breeze. She was a real good sort of egg, and the love of her students just oozed from every pore of her body. She was really one who liked the students and never failed to greet you with a French greeting. And oh boy, sometimes I'd have to think years after that what was. Well, vocabulary was never a problem with me in French, but I had all kinds of trouble getting sentences and together, and that was my trouble in English, for that matter. And so she was gracious enough to finally graduate me at the end, but I think I was sinking pretty low at the end of the year of French. But there was a certain young lady in that class that kind of spruced things up, and I got through the year, I got quite a crush on her, but I was always too shy to ever tell her about it. And so I think this very day we're going to learn about it, because her married name now is Mrs. Jane Dewey. We had a band, laughingly referred to as a band maybe, during this time. It was a small college, and not many musicians were ready to give their all for a band. So it amounted to anywhere from 8 to 12 pieces, depending on who decided to come that day. And it was run by a Mr. Bauer. And so anyway, we acted as a pep band at the football and basketball games. And the fall of 1950, I had just started in at Parsons, and there was going to be a night football game, which we had to go to the high school athletic field for that, because of course Parsons had no lights. Plus there was a lot more seating at the high school field. So we got there, and there was another trumpet player in the band called Marty Ferguson, and she was pretty good. So I really never felt too badly about the fact that she'd play first and I'd play second parts. And then it came this one night, she didn't show up at all. And so no, his name wasn't, or he wasn't a doctor, I don't believe, Mr. Bauer, I guess it was, decided that we'd play the Star-Spangled Banner. Well, I was used to Lou Lehman's arrangement that was used in the guard band and in the high school band. And it was an easier arrangement than what Mr. Bauer was playing. And I really hadn't paid too much attention. I'd learned the second trumpet part. And suddenly I realized there's no other trumpet player. I'm going to have to play first trumpet. And I panicked right at that moment, and I began to think through my mind, my gosh, do I know the part? And I couldn't think of the notes to save me. So I leaned over. The best player in the band by far was a man 1 year younger than I was, called Ron Prill. I said, hey Ron, you play the tune of the Star-Spangled Banner, will you? And he says, well, gosh, friend, he says, our part is just only harmony chords. He said, I don't know the melody. Well, I think he was kidding me. I think he would have probably helped me out. But anyway, it come right down to the wire, and here come Marty Ferguson with her boyfriend in tow, and got her horn case open in time just to open up with the Star Spangled Banner, so I was saved. But needless to say, after that, I got busy learning the first part so that I would have it. That's some of the stories from Parsons from 1950 through 1955. I do want to say that I graduated in the middle semester of 1955, and right after the first of the year. And I come back to the graduation exercise in the spring of 55, and our commencement speaker was a man named Millard G. Roberts. He was coming to the college, and so I got to hear him for the first time, and I think really I would have had to look up in a dictionary about 10% of the words that he spoke that day. Excavators can tear up classrooms of Fairfield Hall, but they can never tear up our memories of the French class and other classes that was there for all the Parsons alumni. Thanks.
Well, I think that's a very fitting conclusion to this.
Well, I got one more
Oh my
thing.
gosh, you
One
got
more thing. How many of you remember the old Parsons song? We have a college in our town, much renowned and great as any college you can find in this or any state. And our alma mater, we're proud we can be. And if you want to spell her name, we'll spell it out for thee. Feast-or-Famine College is trustee true. Ours reputation, good of course you do. As the students loyal, opportunity, and it's wrong, that's no more. That's three parts. You see?
Well, that is truly a fitting finale. Gosh. It's fascinating. We thought we were just going to go from the 30s up until the 50s, but we were able to go back with Mr. Gomer to the 1890s and literally to the beginning of the Roberts era with Fred hearing Millard Roberts' first commencement address. So thank you for that rousing version of the Parsons song, and we appreciate you for watching FPAC, and look forward to our next program. I think our next program about Parsons, maybe not next month, but the next one will be about athletics. So anybody out there in the viewing audience that knows somebody with specific memories about the athletic program at Parsons College who would like to be a part of this program, we would appreciate a phone call. Either call me or Gene Lutke. My number is in the phone book, 472-5418. And thank you for watching FPAC.